Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, welcome back. Let's go around and say our names. I'm Jim.
My name's Risha.
My name is Henry.
My name is Cass.
I'm Paul. My name is Ray.
I'm Tom.
Matthew.
Jeff.
Troy. I'm Brad.
Jack.
Richard.
Warren.
Well, welcome. I'm going to read this bio because it's very impressive. Okay. And it's well written. Melvin Escobar is a bilingual bicultural Dharma teacher, licensed psychotherapist, and a certified yoga instructor. He is a graduate of the East Bay Meditation Center's Commit to Dharma, and for more than a decade has served EBMC in a variety of roles, including on the development team for Resilience, Refuge, and Revolution, a 6-month leadership program for people of color. He has devoted 25 years to serving people from marginalized communities, drawing on his life experience as a queer man of color from an immigrant working class background. Having encountered the priceless wisdom embodied in Buddhism and yoga, he continues daily to learn the revolutionary potential of body-centered, contemplative practices for personal and social healing. Welcome, Melvin, and thank you in advance.
Thank you, Jim. And thanks, Cass and Jeff, and each of you for being here. Whoa, it's like I'm having John Waters and Divine and the smell of vision, but it's like visual vision. And that's just what came to my mind. That's that's how our minds are, huh? The impressions out of all the things we've experienced. Yeah, so this is my first time being in person since this COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm just soaking it in. This is really special that we're showing up just as we are, and that we can show up as gay men and gay and the whole alphabet of men. I don't want to presume anyone's letters. So I had, today's Halloween. And time has been so weird. This with everything. But I think it's important to honor this day, because it is the fancy word, syncretic, S-Y-N-C, syncretism, the sort of the combination of different beliefs or religions. And so I'm from El Salvador, but I grew up in Los Angeles, which is sometimes we say like the border crossed us. A lot of Mexican folks, I feel Mexican even though that is in my ancestry. But today is Dia de los Muertos, and then European, so Celtic, I think the Gaelic way of Samhain, I think is how you pronounce it, and then Hallows Eve, and in preparing today, I thought, well, I might as well talk about grief and loss, but that's feeling too heavy, but we'll see where it goes. My plan is to talk about what gets in the way of being in the moment, and the Buddhist jumping off board I'm going to use is the 5 obstacles or the 5 hindrances, which is a teaching some of you may be familiar with. I recommend, there's this wonderful book that not just came out, it was 2008, reprinted. It's Satipatthana is the book, and so Satipatthana is one of the discourses, and it's been translated a bunch of times, but this, I believe it's German scholar, Buddhist practitioner, Anayalo, who I got to meet once in person. And he's very, very committed, and he made a whole book on these discourses. And the 5 obstacles or hindrances are sense desire, and I'll go into each one of these. And then ill will is the second one, and sloth and torpor is the third one. And I'm gonna break these down, and then of course with my understanding of how it makes sense to me, restlessness and worry, and doubt is the 5th one. And so, because we have all this talk about practice, you know, and I was very impressed that we all were able to sit still as we did, because I realized in my humble yet aging years, it's challenging to be able to sit still, and we're all, this is a grief thing, we're all temporarily able-bodied too, right? That I'm sitting here on the floor. I did a lot of stretching this morning, and I'm able-bodied today that I'm able to do this, but to think of how our bodies change and how we deal with that. And so this is the first hindrance, and I'm putting that in quotes, or obstacles, is the sense desire. How we have a natural inclination to want to feel comfortable all the time. And that's through all our senses. And many of you may know that in Buddhism there's the 6 senses. Yeah, the sight and sound and touch and smell and taste, and then the mind is a sense, which is really interesting to me. And we tend to think of the mind, I think of it, and I think it's a very conditioned way of seeing the mind, is that it's up here. It's like just our brain. But the mind, it's interesting to think of it in the Buddhist sense of a process that is conditioned by the experiences we've had in our life, and that it's not fixed, that it's always changing. And so that's another tendency. We tend to think, oh, it's the mind, or I have a good mind or a bad mind, or we hear like mindfulness, and that somehow I'm not practicing well since I'm not mindful, you know, or I'm not working hard or producing a lot of products for capitalism. So like that they're capital. So that's not like, so we start to like, I think, moralize the mind. But the interesting thing is that in Buddhism, as I understand it, it's just another sense. And that we have to have labels, like, so we're seeing each other, we're seeing statue, table. And the important thing, I believe, is to notice how those labels can be helpful, but then they also can limit our view of this pretty miraculous existence, disembodied existence that we each have, whether we remember or not. You know? And that's the mindfulness. And in this satipatthana, that's the first part. Some of you may know sati, S-A-T-I, is mindfulness, which is actually remembering. It's like a coming back and remembering. And so we forget like how amazing, I guess, we are. And we can use the senses to come back to that. And so this first hindrance is sense desire. So how are we experiencing the world through these senses. And the one way to think of the mind as being this luminous, kind of clear experience that is interdependent in all the things, right? The stardust that we are, and just the energy in here of being with each other, and then everything else, the more than human, right? Just it's incalculable in many ways. But where we get trapped in the sense desire is that we like all the like pretty things and the pretty colors, and then we kind of lose ourselves in a, say, like an image. I think of so much time has been spent on the computer and with all the social media, and I just think of how, and this is more of a question, like how have like the filters through which the colorful filters that we see the world through our computer screens, and I want to say hi to everyone on the computer screen. I can see you a little bit over there. And then hi in the future, the past, time is an illusion for who listens to this. But that to think of how our sight, or whatever senses, specifically our sight, is conditioned, and then we start to turn away from how beautiful we are, and how, again, miraculous. I want to use that word. The etymology is a miracle is object of wonder. And that's something I really love about this practice, is that we get to come back to, dare I say, like a childlike wonder of this existence that we have. So where we get stuck is the metaphor in the Satipatthana is that there are colored dyes that we just get very enchanted with, that the mind gets colored by hues, by fixed views, like that we just want to see the pleasant. We just want things to just be nice, and that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but where we start to get in trouble is to bring it back to that in Buddhism they call the heavenly messengers, that we are all of the nature to age, to get sick and die. And so we can start to get attached to this corporal experience and be so fixed and not realize that we're more than that. But on the other, so the sense desire, the Sanskrit term is tanha, which means thirst. So there's three parts of the sense desire. There's a thirst for wanting to be and to exist as we are and not age or not ever get sick. And then the opposite of that is a craving for non-existence, where we fall into a despair and, well, whatever, I don't like my body anymore because it hurts and it's aging, so let me crave non-existence. So this sort of pushing away. And then the third tanha of sense desires is this like wanting the pleasant all the time. And for those of you who have heard the term thirst trap, it's something when we're on our social media and we just go through like the really hot images and get stuck on them, and it's the way I am able to align my ethics and morality with Buddhism is to not be overly moral with it, and really Lama Rod Owens, who's a colleague of mine, he's wonderful. He defines mindfulness as a moment of experience with the intention of reducing harm. So like, how are we reducing harm when we are stuck in our sense desires? And the sense desire, I think, can give us the opportunity to actually really enjoy the experience through our senses too. I really believe that that's what it's about, like to actually really, really appreciate what we're experiencing, because when we start to restrict or push away too much, it tends to, the chain becomes taut on whatever we're trying to break ourselves free from. Yeah, and so I'm going to move on to the next one, but before I do, I want to give what the Buddha said about how to work with these. So the sense desire, there's 4 of them. And so general acquaintance with and formal meditation on the body's unattractiveness. And so for those of you who have been on long retreat, the tendency, one starts to just fantasize and just all these things. And to be transparent, I feel like I pass a lot of my time each day just fantasizing about, like, if I just had that man, or if I just had this or that, then I would somehow escape suffering or whatever. And so this meditating on the unattractiveness of the body, it's not, as I see it, beating yourself up for our blemishes or our big noses or whatever. It's about, which we can't see through these masks, huh? But to realize that the body, the unattractiveness is all there's a whole refrain in Buddhist scriptures of, like, the body is like body hair and pus and phlegm, and it's a whole long list: bone, sinew, synovic fluid, and just like this kind of unattractiveness in a sense. And when we're able to go into that kind of meditation, and just kind of, I think we can easily, at least I have, just start to appreciate the health that we have, this body we have. Guarding the senses. So again, these 6 senses, being aware of our awareness, our being mindful of our mind and the other senses. And because we can start to see how a lot of energy gets sucked into these other places, and then that doesn't leave energy for coming back, and being with. Moderation in food, and that's a whole other talk. I've been learning a lot about diet culture, and how I think in the gay community it's very common to our body image issues, and I think a lot has been relegated generally to the other side of the gender binary. It's all women are dieters, but I've come to realize how much I've internalized healthism. This sort of, like, if I get sick, then it's something I did, And so but anyways, moderation in food. This was written, a lot of the Buddhist teachings we hear, it was written for monks, like monastics. So it's like how to apply it to our lives. And I think a really, really good way is this 4th kind of antidote to sensual desire: good friends and suitable conversation. And so the beautiful teaching when one of the Buddha's disciples, Ananda, his cousin, the Buddha's cousin and helper, said, "Buddha, I figured it out. Spiritual friendship is half of the holy life." And then the Buddha says, "Ananda, dear Ananda, that's actually the whole of the holy life." And so, which is why it's just really wonderful to be with each of you and to be part of this lineage, this history of the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. The first time I was with your Sangha was around 2000, and it was on Hartford Street, and there was the upstairs and cookies and tea. That's what I remember, and I'm positive it was Stephen Tierney teaching up front, and just what a blessing, and just that seed was a very potent seed, that there was something beyond the bars, and the back of the free rags. Okay, so sense desire. I used to love reading personals. I think I still do. So aversion. So that's the second one. And aversion is ill will or pushing away, hate. And in general, I tried in moments, and the counterbalance for hate is the loving kindness, the metta practice, and compassion, to have an understanding of why. I mean, the basic understanding of hate and aversion, it's pushing away. So sense desire is like wanting more and more and more, and then pushing away is aversion and hate. And then it's a whole spectrum of anger to ill will. The edgy part I'm going to go with is like how we, I think, are all made on the more left side of the political spectrum. And Howard, I mean, it's really challenging to try to see the similarities that humans have around wanting things our way, and not to do a false equivalency, because people on the right specific group, like, we have survived a lot and had to fight a lot to survive and be considered human, and at the same time, and I just went to like the hardest kind of Olympic level, like how to bring understanding and compassion and universal goodwill to other people. But maybe in a more interpersonal setting, when people annoy us, like how are they a reflection of an unloved kind of aspect of ourselves? So that's aversion, and the sense desire. It's like the clear mind would die, and so aversion is like boiling water. That's the metaphor that is used when we're just boiling, and we need to boil to cook stuff. But if we're boiling and burning ourselves and burning others, that's not reducing harm, right? That's just So, and some of you have heard the Buddhist story of holding the coal and hoping the other person gets burned from it, right? And even when we throw it, it kind of may hit somebody, but who's getting burned, right? And so aversions. So, like I mentioned, the four kind of antidotes, or how to work with these. This first one I mentioned around loving kindness and general acquaintance, and the formal meditation on loving kindness or goodwill. Unstoppable friendliness is a fun translation for metta. Reflecting on the karmic consequences of one's deeds. And karma, that's a whole other topic, but means action. And so everything that we do influences the whole, and it's just very complex. It's not so linear most of the time. But a lot of meditation is about noticing the patterns that we have and seeing if they're helpful, or if we want to switch it up. And switch it up not to do something else, but that it generally helps us to be in an easier sort of way when we're not just in the sort of rote kind of behaviors, especially those that are causing more suffering or harm. And then how to bring compassion to those, because the karma, these seeds that we've planted in this life and that are intergenerational. And so when in this moment we would say, oh, how can I turn down the heat on this boiling water, or let it cook what it needs to cook, because we need anger to stick up, right, for our emotional rights, for justice, like justice and power is never conceded without some anger, some power. Yeah. And then repeated wise consideration and good friends and suitable conversation. So you're going to see that comes up for every one of these. So sloth and torpor, I heard some of you giggle, and so it sounds very judgmental. In a word, this one is like depression, yeah. And the next one, restlessness and worry, is like anxiety. And as a therapist, I'm very concerned when people, and as a Buddhist teacher and as a social justice activist and everything, I get very worried when people aren't anxious or depressed because it's like, you're not paying attention. Yeah. So the sloth and torpor, the depression, depression is such a complicated mood state and just experience, and again, that's when we start to touch into grief and loss, and to cut to the chase around all these things. They're not obstacles. These things are part of the path. These things are all part of the path, and it's not that we're doing something wrong. And depression can help us slow down, and be with, because it's our natural inclination to want to push away, and we don't want to take everything in, because that's definitely one way we become depressed, right? Because we're not able to guard, the senses, and we take on so much. But to be clear, it's not about blaming ourselves for. Again, I worry when people aren't feeling the sadness, of life, and we know we need that, right? That the joy is in there with the pain and the sadness. And I don't know of a sure fail-safe way of getting through life not feeling sad or depressed. Because in the ways we avoid, in unskillful ways, it tends to come back in some way, and because these things, the grief and loss, they need our attention too. And I really think, to come back to the spiritual friendship, I really think it's absolutely necessary to do that kind of work in community, to be around, because we know that's what has got us. That's the only thing that's ever got us through, right? I have aversion comes up when I keep on hearing the pandemic, and I think of, the pandemic of HIV/AIDS that is still here and ravaging parts of this country and globally, and a question I'm coming with you all is how do we not wait till the next tragedy to come together and grieve and love together. And to be clear, the grief is because we love. That's the feels like a cruel joke, and I put my hand on my heart because again, a question is like, how do we keep our hearts open even when they get broken and when we lose the things that we love? So sloth and torpor can be a way to like bring us to slow us down, and we need energy to practice, and ideally we could get this next one of restlessness and worry together. I sometimes think of it as pushing the brake pedal and the gas pedal at the same time, and trying to get some sort of balance off that. But we know, we know that the 4 ways to meditate, the 4 postures, that the Buddha taught, sitting, and at East Bay Meditation Center, the place I teach at, we got rid of the word sitting. We're calling it stationary meditation, because again, it takes like so much to be able to sit in these, right? To sit at all sometimes, and walking meditation, which is movement, lying down, which is the hardest one. You can fall asleep, and standing, And so basically that means that we can meditate at any time, And so restlessness and worry, so that antidote generally, and for the sloth and torpor, it's generally like moving the body is like, I think, the most helpful, because trying to sit through anything is highly not recommended, I think. It's been my experience, especially as a therapist and working with trauma. Like, I really, it's been my experience in the hundreds of people I've worked with, it's like move it through the body. Like just move whatever needs to move in the body. And the amazing thing about being with each other here is that the body's already moving stuff all the time. And then somehow we experience that, a fancy term is co-regulation, that we're regulating each other all the time. And then we start to see that, it's happening in nature as well, right? The solidity of our bones and are the same minerals of the mountains, the blood and water flowing are the rivers, and the streams, our veins, and so this coming together and can help us make it a little easier on us to move with, as opposed to pushing away reflexively all the time. So sloth and torpor. So here's another food one. It's lessening food intake, changing meditation postures, mental clarity and cognition of light, and staying outdoors, good friends, suitable conversation. You don't have to memorize these. A lot of us have like phones now. You could take pictures. You could take a picture of this later. But I've covered some of these. Like, and this mental clarity, cognition of light that I mentioned. This is some of you already know. I'm a Joni Mitchell fan, and so that Woodstock song, it was like we're all stardust, right? And she's not the only person who said this, but that cognition of light is to see the light in each other, right? So, and then restlessness and worry. And so good knowledge of the discourses. So the discourses, they're talking about the Buddhist teachings. But I also think of it as the discourses of our mind. Restlessness and worry, if I could just boil it down to 2 words, it would be what if. So restlessness and worry, anxiety is what if. So to notice the discourse of that kind of spinning discourse that we have. And then, so clarification of the discourses through questioning. So if we use the term what if, and then we could say, okay, well, what if that happened? And then so we're questioning them. But it's also questioning the Buddhist discourses. These aren't, this was a really important foundational piece of the Buddhist teachings was see for yourself. Like, see what makes sense for you. Not getting rid of ethics. Yeah, that's part of the deal. But seeing what resonates for you, and so that's the third one. We have to be well versed in ethical conduct. So when we're worried all the time, and I think as gay men, it's such a part of our experiences, like worrying that we're unethical because of who we love, and then coming to this intention of that I'm going to use my sexual energy in ways that reduces harm in the world and myself in the world. Like, that's what I'm committed to, and that's been, I think we've all had experience of that or living it every day, but how I think that's so important to know that we are conducting ourselves in ways that when we're able to do that, we can put our head down on our pillow and say, I did the best I could today. Like, I didn't cause harm, or I noticed that the patterns of harm were continuing, but I was aware of it, and I had this intention of reducing harm. And so that's being well versed in ethical conduct. It isn't sort of the 10 Commandments, but it's the practice of, and when we have, and I think most of the time it's moments of grace that we're just allowed to not participate in causing more harm in the world, because the world is full of harm. That's just part of the deal, and so in those moments of grace, our anxiety goes down when we realize, hey, like I did the best I could, or I didn't do the best I could, and that's okay too, So visiting experienced elders. I had the fortune of doing that yesterday. I went on a walk, but I want to say elders. I want to say gray hair does not make an elder. Elders can be the trees, little kids, and that it isn't sort of like the old soul kind of idea. I'm not sure what that means, but the wisdom is everywhere, and it takes a lot of courage to seek it out, so visiting experience, and then good friends and suitable conversation. So the last one, and then I was asked to leave time. I'm very happy to leave time for discussion. Is doubt. And sometimes I try to think of this one first, because doubt is the one that can really kill our practice. Right? Because two kinds of doubts. Doubts, what's the point of being in the moment, meditating, whatever word you want to use, practicing? What's the point? Or the kind of slightly trickier one is we doubt that we're doing it right. Because I'm not sitting cross-legged, or because I'm feeling discomfort, and that must mean I'm doing something wrong, and so doubt creeps in. And so to use the metaphors, the sloth and torpor is like an algae-filled pool. Restlessness and worry is like wind on the surface of the water. And then doubt is muddiness. Like you just can't see through the thickness. And for those familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, a pithy saying of no mud, no lotus. But the doubt doubt's just a really tricky one. And so I'll just go to the anecdotes. Again, it's good knowledge of the discourses. And continuing, and this is the same as restlessness and worry, the clarification through questioning of the discourses. Being well-versed in ethical conduct. Yeah, so these are the same as the restlessness and worry. And then strong commitment. So being committed to our practice, yeah. That even Larry Yang, who was my primary teacher, when I was in training with him, he would say, even the mornings you can't sit, just honor your practice. You know. So anytime I see a cushion, there's a little bow that I do, because I'm like, I'm committed to this practice, and that's a practical tip, like in terms of having a space where you do have your silent meditation practice, and know that it's there, that you could always come back to. And that's that strong commitment that's what's got us here, right? To be clear, and then good friends and suitable conversation. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
And before we open it up to questions, anyone on Zoom, if you want to ask a question, use the chat, and Grisha will relay that. Questions? Comments?
Answers?
I got one.
Yeah. Jim.
What about a person who has historically been a spiritual friend has just become a manipulative monster?
Yeah. Yeah, what happens a lot is that we, in general, and this isn't good or bad, but I've been practicing to try to learn how to be in conflict with other people. And in general, the conflict builds up, and our culture is set up like that because we can kind of get by on our own, pretty much, and so I heard name calling. So that's the aversion, that's the anger, And on one extreme, maybe the person isn't safe enough to even have a discussion with. So that's a way to take care of yourself. But conflict is sometimes something new wanting to happen, and we might not be ready for that new thing to happen. Or it might not be the new thing that we want. Relationships are so complicated, and in that messiness, we get this, I heard you laugh around no mud, no lotus. Yeah, we don't get the beauty of what's being, wanting to be born. And it's very vulnerable. Doesn't feel comfortable, and of course there's an excuse being in any sort of abusive relationship, but we all, at the same time, we all are repeating the harm that it's been caused to us, and that when we come together, the healing that happens can be very profound.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome.
Bob has his hand up with a question, but he hasn't typed it in.
Okay.
Someone else go on.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you because one of the things that I love about the Sangha is that sexuality comes up, and I really appreciate you bringing this up because for me it's something very unique and very helpful because it is the point of my practice that I feel like it's the hardest one to make progress, and it has to do with the first and the last hindrance, I think. There's a lot of craving, which I struggle with. And I noticed that it's not even biological. I mean, there's definitely like my body craving for it, but there's a lot of like habits that were formed in my early years in this culture. And there's also a little bit of doubt that I cannot live my sexuality in a different way than I trained my mind to live. So and it has a lot to do with like this kind of like alpha male image that I created for myself and for what I crave. And I feel like very stuck in it. So I was wondering if you could say some words about how I can work with that.
Yeah. And I think most of my last therapist, who was also a yoga teacher, and he made me realize that that the habits aren't who I really am. They're just habits. Yeah. And how can we practice harm reduction? Reducing the harm. And so the opposite of the doubt in a word is faith or confidence in your practice and the practice. That as we continue to practice and with this commitment, that we are changing the habits. And how do we make peace with the habits? As you're saying, they're very well worn, and so how do we bring compassion to that? And it's challenging. It's moment to moment. But notice the attachment, and that's kind of a sense desire thing, that if I just get rid of these, then I'll be happy. And so that's not reality, because there's always going to be the unpleasant. And yeah, and the reality is that we're always changing. There's always change happening. That's the impermanence of the nature of things. And the last point I'll make about that is that in those places of deep suffering, and is that those are the places that we connect to our deepest wisdom to. That try not to bypass the unpleasant parts, of things. And then that's a balance too, because we don't want to feel all the suffering, or if it's behaviors, we don't want to hurt ourselves, in ways that amplify the suffering. So is that? Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Greg. Thank you, Melvin, for joining us today. I heard you mention not being very overly moral, related to sense desire. Can you talk more about what you meant by not being overly moral?
Thanks, yeah. I think that was me being overly moral. It's that's again, meeting the practice where you're at and allowing the practice to meet you where you're at. And it's a paradox, We need morality, we need things to hold on to and ethics, but then there's a point where we're holding on so much that we think we're better than we start to other people. It's going to create that othering, and that's not the reality of our existence. We're related with everything. There isn't something out there that's pure and perfect as far as, or maybe this whole mess is the pure and perfect. And so those are just some words on that, but finding what's meaningful to you, and then having community to hold us accountable, and that we're showing up for ourselves so that we could show up for each other, and then we're showing up for each other so that we could show up for ourselves. Yeah. Jeff, yeah.
God, I have so many questions, but
okay.
I wonder, you have in your bio, you talk about embodiment and somatic things, and I've been recently revisiting a lot of that, and learning about somatic anchors and resourcing and things like that. But do you have a go-to? I mean, already I work, of course, noticing the breath, but do you have any tidbits?
Yeah, I do. Full of them, as you can tell. And it's because, these are things that have been healing to me, and I'm just so grateful for everyone that's passed on their wisdom. And that's one thing, is that there isn't anything new under the sun, right? That we have all this wisdom, like, because I recently saw, I was kind of cheesy, but like, even in our conception, like we survived all the other, sperm and stuff. But that's not better. It's sort of luck, right, Grace? But Jeff, we're always embodied. We just always are, So, and we can be sold, like just buy this and buy that, and then you'll do. So there's that part of it. So that's where I start from. We're always embodied, And most of us, spend our embodiment in this part. Yeah, and in the brain and in thoughts and cognition, and so which is very important, But that could be a way to spiritually bypass. Like, we're technically, by definition, spiritually bypass it because we're not being connected to the rest of our experience. Yeah, which is our body. This is the way we connect. Yeah, and then there's more stuff going on, But, I think learning about trauma is really important. Yeah, and to have that intellectual understanding. So I know Steve Turney brought up like the fight, flight, or freeze, And one thing I want to say about that is those are natural, pretty amazing responses, and that's not bad. So this is going back to the over moralizing. Is that we're not. It's pretty amazing that we're doing these things, And then some things are unskillful, like we're repeating stuff even if we're not in danger, or that we have so much comfort that we think just a little bit more, and then I'll be without suffering, And if I just string enough happy moments, I'll be happy forever, kind of thing, And so that, But it is building that capacity to be with. And I really, just the last point on this, and this comes back to the community, that we are, because we're not just doing it for ourselves. Yeah. But, so if we want to personalize it, sure, we can go and look at our own ancestral line or whatever, look at it, but that we're doing it, to reduce harm in the world, and so. But those are just I'm happy you're looking at that. It's very important.
We have one more question in the chat. Bob typed it in. Thanks for the talk. It got me thinking. Besides the 5 physical senses and the sense of mind, has there ever been the inclusion of the sense of humor as a value? Humor and sympathy, suffering. Has any Buddhist thinker or writer discussed humor as part of Buddhism? There was one book. I think it's just the Buddha laughed or something. If you actually look at the scriptures, I'm not a scholar, but from what I've read, there's irony in some of the teachings. They can be pretty funny. Humor. Another Joni, life philosophy through Joni Mitchell, but she says laughing and crying are like the same release. Yeah, and so, and when we're able to laugh, and this goes back to the trauma piece, that means we've healed integrated some of the trauma. There isn't getting rid of, and you all know the word dukkha. That's the word for trauma, pain, suffering, whatever, unsatisfactoriness with all these translations of it. But when we're able to laugh, that means that we've worked through something. And this comes back to community, how laughing alone is one thing, but laughing with someone else is a whole other thing. And so that's a good example of why it's important to be with others, to have spiritual friends, because the belly laughs are they don't happen alone so much, Yeah, so thank you for that.
Melvin, thank you very much for offering a very helpful time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your practice.
Do we have announcements?
Yes.
Yes, Richard.
November 13th here, Steve Kearney will be leading a day-long retreat from 10 to 5. There's no admission charge, just show up. It'll also be Zoom. Same link as we use for all the GDF meetings. And everybody's welcome.
Great. Will we bring our own lunch?
Yes, we're not providing
Okay.
lunch this time, just
Okay.
to
Yeah, that makes sense. Cass?
I'm the host today, so stay and enjoy the fellowship of the Sangha. There's hot water for tea and cold weather for water. There's vegan cookies and treats. There's some Halloween candy that's not vegan, probably. And I'll be going around with the Dawn Bowl. Please take advantage of the opportunity to practice generosity, to support the work of the Sangha and the infrastructure and the things that we do to reach out to the community and support the community with newsletter, dinners, and such. I think that's all.
Thank you. And special thanks to Grisha and Jeff and Henry, who over the past weeks have set up this very slick
That's amazing.
system.
Yeah.
And it's a real gift.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's stand up for the dedication of merits. Chords. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.